Welcome to the Seahawkers podcast with your hosts, Adam Emmert.
If you can play in an amazing scheme and have a lot of success, why is that derogatory?
And Brandon Schultz.
If Jerry Jones really wanted Earl Thomas, he'd be a Cowboy by now.
Go Hawks!
This is episode 209 of the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz of the Military Seahawkers, and joining me, my good buddy and Montana Seahawker, Adam Emmert.
Hey, man, it's good to see you. Glad we survived the pseudo 20-year reunion, like with all of our friends up at the lake.
Yeah,
with lots of beer.
We survived that, and we survived losing our recording from last week. So
yeah, that was out of all the time for the equipment to just not record. That was terrible timing.
It was terrible timing because I mean, we did see each other over the weekend, but it was not conducive for a recording environment.
No, because there were jet skis and other things to do.
Yes.
Sorry.
I jet skied for the first time and didn't crash. I'm pretty impressed with myself.
Well, I've jet skied a lot, and these were older, like early 90s Yamaha wave runners. And so they're much narrower than like the newer stuff from the 2000s. They're a little more tippy, but they're fun. You can kind of flat spin them. Mm-hmm. The only time I got to ride it was when we would go to load the jet skis back up at the end of the night. And I was like, I'm getting one of those flat spins in. I'm doing it. So I do it, get all the way around, 3/4 of the way around. And once you kind of get all the way around, the back end kind of sinks down into the water. It kind of sucks you. Mm-hmm. And you got to roost it right then. You got to hit the throttle. And the second I realized, I was like, oh, I gotta hit it. It really sucked hard on the back of the machine. And I hit the throttle, and that immediately separated me from the jet ski and sploosh right into the water.
And no video.
Well, that's fine. I was laughing before I hit the water, though. It was pretty funny. In my defense, though, I did execute one perfectly the second time around.
Nice.
But it's a fun weekend. Good people, good stuff.
We got our big summer fun weekend out of the way now with training camp starting this week, Adam. It's time to ramp up. It's time for business.
Yeah, thank God. I'm very, very ready for training camp. Absolutely.
I know you are.
I'll be watching it online. Yes, looking for anything that seems like it's worthy to talk about.
We have our Know Your Rivals series to continue. Today we'll be talking San Francisco 49ers. And then a little bit later this week, early next week on the schedule, we'll be talking Arizona Cardinals to wrap that up. Then it's right into Seahawks football. It's here, man.
It's here. Whew. Made it through another one.
Yeah.
These off seasons are getting harder and harder to get through, man.
It's a little bit tough, especially when, and we probably won't talk about it this show, but we do have thoughts on Earl Thomas. You know, that situation continues. He posts on Instagram and everybody loses their minds. And, it's just this continues. I think Seahawks fans tend to take these issues a little bit too personally, but it happens. You tend to get emotionally involved when you have a player that you love.
Don't talk to me till week one. That's all I got to say about Earl. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, I can't find a story more boring than, oh my God, Earl Thomas wants more money and the Seahawks don't want to give it to him and he's going to be a Cowboy and he put something on. Oh my stars, he put something on Instagram.
Yeah.
Oh no. Give me a break. I'm so sick of this crap. Like, just Earl Thomas is a Seahawk. He's going to be a Seahawk and he's either going to play for the money that is on his contract this year or he's going to try to sit out till week 6. And good luck with that. Like, he saw how that worked out for Cam. The team does not cave.
Right.
So, like, this is such a non-story. And then you see a headline here just recently. It's one GM somewhere, anonymously came out and said that the Seahawks are not giving away Earl Thomas. I saw that. That popped up on my phone. Like, Seahawks not giving away Earl Thomas. That was the little badge that popped up on my phone. Huh. No crap.
No way.
We're not going to give away Earl Thomas. And apparently nobody wants to pay. Fine. Then Earl Thomas is Seahawk. Yeah. Just let it go. Media, let it go. Fans, let it go. This isn't about you.
You know, the only reason the story's sticking around is because it's the Cowboys. And Cowboys fans will not let this go. And Cowboys fans just need to realize that if Jerry Jones really wanted Earl Thomas, he'd be a Cowboy by now. He would have made the trade. He didn't make the trade. He does not want Earl Thomas right now. Get over it, Cowboys fans.
Yeah, not for a reasonable price, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, they want Earl Thomas if we'll give it to him for like a seventh and a bag of footballs. They do that in a heartbeat. But no, we want like premium stuff for a premium player. So if they're not willing to pay, then bye-bye. And I'm tired of hearing about it.
And Earl Thomas is a Seahawk. And for everybody who's got consternation over the contract talks, it'll happen if it happens. If it doesn't happen, he's going to be here week 1. If he's not here week 1, he'll be here week 7. So
yeah, at the latest.
At the latest, right.
At the latest.
And if you were so bent on trading him just to get over it, I don't know what to tell you.
Let the man try to get more money. Let the team negotiate, and it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
And then when he's continuing to be in a Seahawks uniform, you can continue to root for him.
Wait, he doesn't want to be a Seahawk anymore, Brandon. Didn't you read all about that? Except for when he says specifically he wants to be a Seahawk. Okay.
Except for that.
Just whatever.
He just wants long-term security. And after seeing what Cam went through, can you blame the guy?
No, I don't. So it's not a big deal. It's going to be fine.
And really, in the most ideal business relationship, you let Earl play out the final year of his contract, and then you franchise him. I mean, if you're hardcore business, that's what you do.
Correct. It's exactly what I would do.
If you were trying to GM at your best.
Yeah, if I'm John Schneider right now, that's exactly what I do.
Maybe that'll happen.
Earl doesn't have a lot of leverage. He's using the tiny bit that he has, and good for him. He'll be fine.
He'll be fine. We'll be fine. And what do you say we get into our chat with Oscar from the Better Rivals and get into this offseason that the 49ers are having? The more and more I see about it, 49ers may as well be the second best team in this division.
Oh, might as well be. They've already been anointed.
Yeah.
If you want to crown them, crown them.
Rams are going to the Super Bowl. 49ers, they're the new challengers to the Rams. And we're heading up the bottom of the division.
Right. Yeah. We're even worse than Arizona somehow suddenly.
Let's bring him on. Oscar from the Better Rivals podcast, doing our annual Know Your Rivals series with the Better Rivals. Oscar, how you doing, man?
I'm doing swimmingly, man. How are y'all doing?
It's great. I think Adam and I are still recovering from the Cam Chancellor retirement announcement. But it was something we knew that was coming, but still, when you have an off season where you lose guys like Michael Bennett, you lose Cliff Averill, Cam Chancellor, you kind of expect him to be gone. Then you have some free agency departures like Jimmy Graham and Paul Richardson. And oh yeah, Richard Sherman goes to the 49ers. It's a little bit of a downer.
It is, man. It's a transition year for y'all. I was asking you before we started recording, kind of recording proper, how you were feeling about this season, because this is, you guys have had a core for a while, and every dynasty or every potential dynasty waxes and wanes, and you were definitely in the down part of the run that was, the core Seahawks championship. So I'm curious how you guys are feeling about this.
We kind of have to explain this to each one of our rivals, Oscar, because I know not everybody is completely dialed into the Seahawks, but there's a lot, despite all of the transition. And I think it gets kind of overblown in the media a little bit because, those big names, they really stand out and it feels like a transition. But when you still have guys like Earl Thomas on the back end, Bobby Wagner in the middle, you got a lot of young talent on the defensive line. You got Doug Baldwin and Russell Wilson, on offense still. When you consider all that talent, and a lot of those guys, Cliff Averill was gone for the second half of the year. Richard Sherman was gone for the second half of the year for the Seahawks.
Cam Chancellor was gone for the second half of the year.
Right. Yeah. So we got to see what this transition was going to look like in the second half of last season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that, and you're presuming that Earl Thomas is going to be around. Who knows? He could be a Dallas Cowboy before things are all said and done, right? Like it's been crazy. I guess my real question for y'all is, Pete Carroll, of course, is the architect and for better or worse, the architect of this entire thing. Are you happy with the job that he is doing, shepherding the team through the transition, or is this kind of like, I don't know, man, we'll wait and see because this bubblegum chewing California ethos doesn't really suit us when we're not winning? Or are you okay with riding the Pete Carroll train as long as it goes?
I'm 1,000,000% okay. Like, you look at last year and they loaded up and they went for it. I mean, the Sheldon Richardson trade, the trade for Dwayne Brown, all those things. And then basically the Thursday night massacre happens and everybody gets hurt in one game.
against the Cardinals
because of freaking Cardinals. And that kind of ends that kind of last, empty your load on that season and see if you can, shoot that last round and see if you can, win another title. And I'm super glad that they went for it. Now, when you go for it, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes Lady Luck comes up and takes out half of your all-stars in that season. Then you look at this season, and so it's time to go ahead and retool a little bit and tweak around the edges. And like Brandon said, you still have a lot of the main stalwarts. We saw a lot of the young talent play once these all-stars were hurt and out of the game, and many performed really, really well. Like, not having Richard Sherman here doesn't concern me too terribly much because Shaquille Griffin played just as well, if not better. And he's going to be playing the left side. Byron Maxwell plays well in our system. We'll be fine there.
And we signed this big name corner named Dante Johnson, who I know you'll be able to tell us all about, Oscar.
Right.
Oh, man. You guys are going to love Dante Johnson. He's going to do a lot of fantastic things for you. The first thing that he's going to do for you is be the centerpiece of your drinking game. Because anytime you can talk about Johnsons in the secondary, you have to jump on that opportunity. We've enjoyed the Johnson rule for several years. I bequeath the Johnson rule to you. Basically, for you and your fans, whenever any of the announcers say anything that sounds dirty but isn't, right? Like Johnson really tipped that ball, or Johnson really rose up and made that tackle. I mean, basically anything that's tangentially kind of, dirty but really isn't, you drink. And so that has been a long-standing drinking rule for the Better Rivals podcast. And so now the drinking rule lay at your feet, the Johnson rule.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of drinks. I don't think he's making this roster, but we'll see. There's a long way to go. But with all that said, like I love the fact that we have a bunch of new young talent that they've infused the team with. And these are guys that are going to be in tune with Pete Carroll's message. I think it had gone a little stale with Richard in particular and Michael Bennett in particular. And now you have guys that'll be more receptive to it. So I think it's good to turn it over every now and then. I mean, look at Bill Belichick and the Patriots. I mean, it's not like he's changing. He's constantly churning that roster. And here we are at our first opportunity to make our second run with Russell Wilson at quarterback. And you got to imagine when you have a franchise guy, you'll get 2 or 3 of those runs as long as he stays healthy. So this is the beginning of the second run, and I feel great about where we're at.
I honestly, I think you're right. Like one of the things that we've always, I've been on y'all's show now for, this is the 4th year running?
I think that's fourth, yeah.
Yeah, you're our longest tenured rival to come on. I love it.
Well, one of the things that we've always enjoyed, even when we smack talk on Twitter, is that we're both kind of, honest about our team, even though we like to talk crap about our teams with each other. Yeah. And I do think that people jump ship on coaches too quickly. And I'm much a fan. Like, you have a great coach in Pete Carroll. He's done great things. Yeah, this is exactly it. It's a retooling. You got to figure out the new players and the new system, and you've got your centerpiece, which is Russell Wilson. And as much as I hate how good he is, he's damn good. He is one of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And so you try and put pieces around him, you try and retool it and figure it out. And I think you're exactly right. Whether or not this second push ends up manifesting itself the same way as the other ones, who knows? But it is indeed time for that second push. And so we'll see what happens. I think y'all will end up, probably third in the division, all things going as I hope they do. But nevertheless, I do think that.
Wait, you were hoping for the Rams to finish ahead of us? I thought we were teaming up against the Rams here, Oscar. What's going on?
No. My hope is that we're first and the Rams are second and y'all are like a third. But look, if we're going to go 2-3 against 1, that's fine too. I'm okay with that. As long as the Niners are on top, things are okay.
Man, you bequeath the Johnson rule to us, and then I feel like you're stabbing us right in the back. And
he's riding high. He's got handsome Jimmy in the fold now. He comes out there and is undefeated as a starter for the 49ers. I imagine, Oscar, you're thinking you're not going to lose a game for the rest of the Jimmy G era, right?
16-0 for this season.
That's just math. I can't argue with facts. I can't argue with numbers. You project his seasons over the course of a 200 game career, and he's never going to lose. I can't argue with math. Give that man a $200 million contract guaranteed and call it a day.
Right.
What could go wrong? But I like the move. I do like the move paying Jimmy. I mean, he does have the look of a franchise QB. I mean, I think I told you, you were saying earlier, it's nice that we can be honest about each other's teams. Like I told you last time you were on here, I really like the John Lynch hire. I really like the Kyle Shanahan hire. And I thought that you could start to see this team starting to turn around.
And I think you guys took another very solid step forward this year. I think you're probably still 2 years away, but holy crap. Like you're really starting to find some of those pieces.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was probably a bit more skeptical of the John Lynch hire than even y'all were, I think, when I was on last year, because John Lynch was still very much an unknown. And Kyle Shanahan was very much, I think, the more known quantity, and we were excited about him and his offensive system. But John Lynch was like, I don't know, maybe broadcaster turned GM. Turns out, I mean, outside of a couple of questionable decisions, which, we can get into if you want to talk about, Kyle Juszczyk or Malcolm Smith, one of those players that you're intimately familiar with. I think outside of a couple of signings, he's done a really, really good job. And so I think you're right. We did a really good kind of roster breakdown evaluation series on our podcast over the course of 4 weeks. And we took a deep dive into the roster and broke them out into about 4 or 5 tiers, where we looked at, kind of core players or franchise players, if you will, and then players you can build rosters around, players that are developmental, players that are really replaceable, and kind of broke it down. And the roster is not completely full of talent. It's not like the 2011-2012 Niners when, the Seahawks and the Niners are battling for NFC West supremacy and really NFC supremacy in those years. The roster is not that. So I agree with you. I think if the Niners make the playoffs this year, it will be because they got lucky in a game or two, and that managed to put them up into that, kind of 10-win range. But I think, kind of 8 wins is about the break-even point for the team this year. And I think they're about a year away, maybe not 2. But even then, the Shanahan-Lynch duo has remade this team and roster in a way that we could only have dreamed of when we signed them. And I think they've done a great job.
Well, you talked about some of the questionable decisions, and I think what you're getting at is some of these contracts that a lot of us are seeing, Kyle Juszczyk being one of those where paying a fullback so much money, it just seems a little bit different compared to what everybody else in the league's doing. You paid Gary Gilliam a bunch of money. You paid, from what it appears to be.
Gary Gilliam. It's not Gary Gilliam. You got to pronounce it correctly. It's Gary Gilliam.
You were doing it wrong the whole time. Oh, man. I
no
feel
wonder
like
he refused to play Worth the Damn for us. Yeah.
But Brock Coyle, one of those guys, Malcolm Smith, a lot of guys where it seems like they're really big contracts for players that didn't really make it on other teams.
Yeah, there's a couple players in there that I would say don't fall into the weird decision making. Like I don't think Brock Coyle falls into the weird decision making, nor do I think that Gary Gilliam in all of his double consonant splendor falls into that either. Those contracts are really kind of backup money contracts, and that's exactly what they are. Gary Gilliam is your swing tackle, and then you've got Brock Coyle.
I don't even think you can say Gilliam, Oscar.
No, I can't. It's Spanish is my first language, so there's literally in my brain every time I see double L's, I just have to say a Y. It's just what happens.
I understand.
Yeah, it's you can't describe it. It's just what happens.
Yeah, I get it, man. I can't call Patrick Mahomes. I have to call him Mahomes every time. Yeah. I can't help it. Yeah,
and you know what? I'm fully on board with that. He's my homies too. It's cool.
Yeah.
But I think Brock Coyle falls into that kind of backup money area as well. The contracts I think that Niners fans should worry about, and things that I think are indicative of maybe the flaw in the decision making for the Niners, are Malcolm Smith, Kyle Juszczyk, and to a certain degree, Jerick McKinnon. I think those are the contracts that you think to yourself, okay, could you have gotten maybe 10 to 15% less production for maybe like 50% less money? And I think in each of those cases, you could make a pretty decent argument that you could. Kyle Juszczyk is, I think, like 4x the contract for any fullback ever when you think of kind of per year or overall deal. And his per year deal and his cap numbers are, of course, not nearly as worrisome, because Parag Marathe, who's the chief negotiator for the 49ers, does a fantastic job of structuring contracts in a way that are very, very team friendly. So most of these contracts are going to be, seem like a big number, but in reality, it's going to be easy for the team to cut bait after a year or two. And you see that with both Juszczyk and you see it with McKinnon. And I haven't looked at Malcolm Smith's contract in a bit, but I imagine his is the same way. But the decision making that worries you with the Niners is they focus on a player, they think that's the guy, and they get into a bidding war and they just pay an outsized amount of money to that player. And it's great if it works out, but oftentimes, the NFL decision making process is not perfect. So you end up straddled with the contract for a player that's not going to do what you want him to do, when you could have got the same thing for much cheaper. So that's the only kind of flaw in the front office decision making that I think Niner fans are worried about. But other than that, I think that the front office does a fantastic job.
Well, I want to go back to some comments. We spent a little bit of time on Handsome Jimmy, and I think you guys came up with a good nickname for him too. But he's Handsome Jimmy on our show because obviously, that's self-explanatory nickname. And he was kind of called out in the media here recently with Jalen Ramsey, saying that he's more of a system guy. And from what you've seen over the past, those 5 games and knowing kind of the Kyle Shanahan scheme, is he wrong?
Personally, and this is where I'll differ with most Niner fans, I don't think Jalen Ramsey is wrong at all. I think that when you plot, kind of quarterback eliteness, if you will, we'll call it the Joe Flacco scale. You put Joe Flacco on one end, is he elite? And then you put kind of scheme on the other end, and it's all scheme. And you put that on a spectrum. I think Jimmy right now does tend towards more scheme, being, giving him favorable matchups that he can take advantage of. I think the thing that oftentimes NFL fans don't understand is that base level NFL quarterbacking is that you should be able to hit an open guy if you're not pressured. Like that should be a base level NFL expectation. And the problem is that most quarterbacks are not good enough to do that. And so we get used to watching Brian Hoyer and we get used to watching CJ Beathard. And we think to ourselves, oh my God, those guys couldn't hit the broad side of a barn even if they weren't pressured at all. And so when we see a player that can do that can hit what is effectively base level NFL expectation, we lose our minds. We absolutely lose our collective minds, even though in reality that person's running with no one near him for 5 yards because Kyle Shanahan dialed up the perfectly dialed Yankee or the blaze out as a compliment to that Yankee. And all Jimmy has to do is take his 5th step, throw that ball on time, and the dude's open. And so I think Jalen Ramsey is exactly right.
But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, people seem to
thing.
lose their minds when Ramsey said that. And it's like, well, yeah, but you have an offensive coordinator that can scheme that way to get guys open.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it in terms, too. I mean, there are certain guys who are definitely scheme guys, but have had a lot of success in this league. I mean, if you look at Matt Ryan, for example, that's a guy who's not overly talented. Like, I mean, he's definitely a bunch of tiers below the top quarterbacks in this league, in my humble opinion. I think he's closer to the Dalton Flacco line, but has played in some really great schemes. So if you can play in an amazing scheme and have a lot of success, why is that derogatory? I don't quite understand.
Well, I think there's a couple different things, right? And I think that what Jalen Ramsey is trying to answer one question, and I think that fans are trying to answer a different question. Jalen Ramsey, I think, was trying to answer the question, is Jimmy Garoppolo a fantastic quarterback right now? Because he was answering that question like in the context of the top 100, right, which in and of itself, as an aside, is dumb because it's basically a popularity contest.
Right.
It's a bunch of players who are just asked to rank their top 10 players, and then they take the aggregate of that top 10 and put it into a 1 to 100 ranking. It's dumb. It's a popularity contest. So putting that aside, I think what Jalen Ramsey is saying is like, look, Jimmy Garoppolo is a talented guy. He has a lot of potential. He could be amazing, but in the game in which he beat us, it was a lot of Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo just executing the throws that we were able to give him because Shanahan understood how to attack our defense. We did an episode last week, actually, our first Smart Football episode of this offseason, where we talked about how Kyle Shanahan uses run personnel in order to attack defenses to basically capitalize on defensive inefficiencies. Because now nickel is the new base. Your third corner is a starter. That's where you exist on 65% of your snaps on defense, and 11 personnel is effectively the new base formation on offense. Well, Kyle Shanahan during Jimmy Garoppolo's tenure had the highest 2 wide receiver personnel in the league in the 5 weeks where Jimmy started. And what he did was he was able to gain better matchups against an inside linebacker or against the safety that you don't get when you've got a third corner out there. And Jimmy Garoppolo was able to exploit that to a high degree of efficiency. And a lot of that has to do with just the game planning and what Kyle Shanahan is able to do with isolating coverage defenders like linebackers that aren't as good in coverage as you would have, I don't know, maybe a hybrid defensive back or a cornerback. And a lot of that just has to do with what Kyle Shanahan knows and can take advantage of on the offensive side when he's scheming balls. Now, that kind of thing is really good scheme. And that coupled with Jimmy is kind of like the question you're trying to answer there is, how good can the 49ers offense be when you have a good quarterback who works within the system and a great offensive mind that's calling great plays? That's a different question than what Jalen Ramsey is trying to answer, which is how good is Jimmy Garoppolo as a quarterback independent of scheme? How is he able to throw the ball away from a defender's leverage? How is he able to do certain things that Tom Brady does, that Peyton Manning does? And I think that quick release and mental processing are a big part of it, which is what Jimmy has. But Jimmy's not there yet. Jimmy's not in that kind of like top elite, top 2-3 area where, dare I say, Russell Wilson is currently. Because I do think Russell Wilson is an elite quarterback. And I do think he deserves to be spoken about in that top 3, top 5 kind of elite quarterback area. Jimmy's not there yet. Does he have the potential to be? Absolutely. But is he there yet? I don't think so.
So we've talked a lot about Jimmy G, and I think that's probably, somebody that all of us as Seahawks fans are pretty familiar with. We all know Handsome Jimmy's there, and he's done some good things. Out of all the position groups on the team this year for the 49ers, which position group are you most excited about as far as improvement this year?
Oh, man, that's a good question. In terms of improvement, well, I guess there's a couple ways to look at it. There's single improvement as in the area that we think is most exciting and or most improved. And then there's the kind of area of the football field that is actually going to impact games. I think if we're going to put Jimmy aside, the part of the team that I'm most excited about improving is the defensive line. DeForest Buckner, I think, is an underrated interior force. The dude is awesome. His PFF grade this past year was just north of 90, which puts him in elite territory. He was, I think, the 3rd highest graded interior defender for Pro Football Focus this year, if I remember correctly. I think Solomon Thomas is going to take a leap year. He's finally getting played at the position that he should have been played at from the get-go, which is the weak side defensive end, or Leo, if you're into that thing. And then the team has said they're going to kick him into the interior, and he's going to rush opposite of DeForest Buckner, which I think is good. And then I think that now Eric Armstead gets to his more natural 5 technique kind of big end position. And I think that's a really, really fantastically solid defensive line. Granted, we don't have that premier pass rusher, but I don't think one was there to be added this year outside of maybe Harold Landry. And the team couldn't swing drafting him this year. So I still think that team, that part of the defense is going to improve a ton. And as you know, I mean, we run basically the same system as y'all with a couple of tweaks. And because I think we run the Gus Bradley version of the defense. And there's been several versions that have gone through Seattle. But it all starts up front. And I think if that defensive line can do what it is primed to do, the rest of the defense is going to click. So I think that's probably the part that makes me most excited if I'm going to put Jimmy aside. Other than that, I think, running back for me is probably another position that I think is going to be great because of what the running backs can do in the passing game. And I think Jerick McKinnon is such a fantastic fit for this offense. It's a little crazy how well he fits, and I'm excited to see him catch, probably somewhere north of 50, 60 balls and get close to 1,000 yards receiving from the running back position.
Yeah, I have to say, I was probably most surprised at both your reaction on the Better Rivals to getting Jerick McKinnon from the Vikings. And I
think it's a perfect signing.
It wasn't a guy who really jumped out at me from the Vikings, but you guys are dialed in on him.
Oh man, we did a free agency series where we kind of talked about, we did a whole roster breakdown, and then we said, okay, where are the positions that are lacking? Where do we need to upgrade? And we both identified a pass catching running back as a need for the 49ers. Now, we were kind of honed in on Dion Lewis. We broke the free agents down into tiers, and we said, what's the kind of top tier free agent that we could or should target? And we both thought Dion Lewis is the guy. He is, kind of underrated in New England, but he is an underrated runner and a fantastic pass catcher. If you're going to pay $6 million for a running back, that's probably where you want to pay that money. We actually had identified Jerick McKinnon as a tier 2 free agent, not because of his skills were lacking, but just because we thought he'd come at more of like the $3 to $4 million more bargain price because he was unproven for the Vikings. But we thought his skill set matched what the Niners did perfectly. He was a high athletic dude. His spark number was, I think, the first in his draft class. And of course, the Niners love high sparky athletes, which I know Seattle fans know spark. But Matt Breida, when we had him as an undrafted free agent out of Georgia Southern, same university incidentally as Jerick McKinnon, he was another kind of high spark athlete, number 1 spark athlete for his running back class as well. So the Niners clearly had a pattern for super athletic dudes that could affect the passing game. And so that's why we zeroed in on Jerick McKinnon. Turns out that was the guy that Kyle Shanahan valued as well, and he coveted him. and the Niners paid him. And I think it's a perfect fit.
And for people who don't know Spark, it's just kind of a high athleticism, having those top marks in your particular class of position. And Shaquem Griffin was one of those guys in the draft this year.
I really wanted. And when you guys drafted him, I was like, of course, Seahawks drafted him. Of course.
We heard that from Rams fans too. They want. I think fans of every single team, just seeing Shaquem Griffin and how he kind of just leading up to the draft, kind of that underdog status that he brought with him, going into the combine and really kind of blowing everybody away. A lot of people kind of fell in love with him a little bit, and it was nice to see him fall to the Seahawks. We get him in the 5th round. But while we're talking draft, why don't we talk about what you guys have done? With your number 1 pick, a little bit of a surprise, I guess, for 49ers fans, maybe initially with Mike McGlinchey being the top tackle. He was the first tackle taken off the board. And was that necessarily where you thought that they were going to go?
So it's not where I thought they were going to go, and it's not where we really wanted them to go. We were very, very open in our kind of stumping for Harold Landry as the top edge defender and the top impact player at a position of need for the 49ers, which is that premier pass rusher. And so we were really on that Harold Landry train. But I think the Mike McGlinchey pick makes a ton of sense. It makes sense because Kyle Shanahan really values tackles and centers in his scheme because they have some of the toughest blocks in that scheme. The tackles, especially backside tackles, have a lot of reach blocks when the run's going away from them. And Trent Brown was just not a guy who made that block successfully. He was a much better pass blocker than he was a run blocker, Trent Brown. And with Mike McGlinchey, I think you've got a better run blocker than at least right now with the NFL you have pass blocker. And we all know that Kyle Shanahan's offense is predicated off that outside zone and predicated off that run. So I think Mike McGlinchey is going to be an immediate upgrade when it comes to that run blocking, and he's no slouch when it comes to pass blocking. I think the other part with Mike McGlinchey, too, is that I think the Niners are thinking a little bit about the future. And if all goes well, they're not going to be picking in the top 15 anytime in the next probably 2 or 3 years. And if you're going to get a bookend tackle that can hopefully eventually switch to left tackle once Joe Staley reaches retirement age in likely, I don't know, maybe a year or two, then this is the time to get him. And he was the guy that fit all of their molds. And I think it made sense. And we knew that he wasn't going to be there later because the Raiders were really wanting him, and they ended up drafting Colton Miller after trading down. So ultimately, I think Mike McGlinchey is someone who has fantastic athleticism, which is something that Kyle Shanahan really, really values in tackles. He's someone who is a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker, but it's not like his pass blocking is anything good. And we have to remember, too, that Quentin Nelson is a guard only because Mike McGlinchey was already there at tackle. And so this is a guy who was good enough to basically kick Quentin Nelson into guard, and that's the type of player that the Niners got. And I think they got a fantastic player in the 1st round. I think it fits exactly with the philosophy that Kyle Shanahan's trying to build. And so all in all, even though it wasn't a sexy pick, even though it wasn't a, oh my God, amazing, knock your face off pick, I think it's still a solid foundational pick for the future of the 49ers.
It's really interesting running down the list of 49ers draft picks. You talked about how 49ers schemes and the Seahawks scheme are somewhat similar. Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, and he was with the Seahawks for a while and worked under Gus Bradley in Jacksonville. And I'm running down your list of draft picks, and you would think that having similar schemes that some of these names would jump out at me. But other than Dante Pettis, who played at Washington, none of these guys really were guys that we covered looking at the draft leading up to it. What are some of the other names that excite you from the 49ers draft class?
Well, I think there's 2 names that specifically excite me. One is going to be one that probably wouldn't have fit the current Seattle system, but I think is still super exciting because of what the team thinks about coverage defenders in the modern NFL. And that's going to be Fred Warner, linebacker at BYU. Another high spark guy, 80th percentile spark guy, 10th linebacker in that class. He had pretty solid PFF grades, 3 seasons as a starter, had over 81 grades in each season. But the thing about him that's super exciting, though, is that he basically played as an overhang defender in college, which means he was a kind of a hybrid linebacker safety guy, and he's used to covering defenders in space. And people think, oh, well, he's a little undersized, but the dude weighed like 230, 240, which if you know from the Bobby Wagners and KJ Wrights of the world, that's basically the new modern linebacker. Bobby Wagner, I think, is the prototypical modern linebacker, and that guy tops out at like, 245, 250. He's probably up at 255 now. But Fred Warner is someone that tells me that the defensive side of the ball is really focused on coverage defenders that also don't give up as much as you would need to typically in the run game. And that's super exciting. So I'm excited to see how the team plays him. The other is going to be a defensive back, and that's going to be defensive back Tarvarius Moore at a Southern Miss, someone who primarily played safety, but is getting converted to cornerback. Another big, long corner. The dude's like 6'3", 195, 95th percentile spark player, fourth among safeties, and even if you compare him against other cornerbacks, still compares very favorably. But the dude is a very, very explosive athlete. He is fitting the athletic mold of what you want out of that position. And now, of course, you've got Richard Sherman, who is basically a coach on the field. You've got a Keller Witherspoon, who's a second-year player who had a pretty solid season after he came into the 49ers starting lineup. You've got Tarvarius Moore. You've got basically a crop of cornerbacks that are all super athletic, fit that mold, and now they've got the perfect veteran teacher in Richard Sherman, and you hope Richard Sherman has another year or two left in him to be that bridge to the other corners the Niners have. And those are probably the two draft picks outside of our number one that excite me the most.
Okay, Oscar, you mentioned his name 3 or 4 times just in that last sentence. I think it's probably time we got to the Sherman conversation. Before we do this, though, Oscar, I want to play a cut from a game back in the 2013 season. It really an iconic moment for both franchises, but I don't think Seahawks fans have heard this particular play called by the 49ers radio broadcast team. So I edited up a little bit, and I'm not really sure how either of us are going to feel about listening to it at this point, but let's go ahead and listen.
Can the 49ers conquer the best red zone defense in the league to get to the Super Bowl? Clock running with 30 seconds. Kaepernick takes the shotgun snap. Kaepernick looking, throws one to the near side for Crabtree. He leaps. It's batted up and intercepted. Intercepted in the end zone by Seattle. Richard Sherman denies the 49ers. The 49ers standing on the field in disbelief. Hands on hips. Richard Sherman batted the ball in the air. Malcolm Smith caught it, but Richard Sherman made the play. And the man who is the NFL's best corner is going to send Seattle to the Super Bowl.
The one ball that they threw at Richard Sherman all day, and he was able to just find a way to get his left arm up. And Crabtree had a step on him, but you're talking about a 6'3" corner, long arms. He was able to just get the body around and get his hands on it, tipped it up to his defender.
All right, Oscar, I want to get your reaction first. How does it feel now to have Richard Sherman on your football team?
Man, it's really weird to have both of those players in the 49ers right now. Both Malcolm Smith and Richard Sherman
right.
are both Niners. Honestly, I have never. I think there's a really ugly side of football fans, and I think sports fans in general, that I think have like genuine evil hate for players they don't know for no other reason than they're good and they play for an opposing team. We've never really been like that, and I've only ever disliked Richard Sherman because he was good at football and he was not on my team. And now the only part that really made me turn against Richard Sherman, the fact that he wasn't on my team, that's no longer a problem. He's on my team. So I'm 100% on board with the whole Richard Sherman thing. I think it's good to have a player like him be on our defense because of the youth that the roster has at that defensive back position. It's definitely a liability. And even if Richard Sherman only comes back to be 80% of what he was 2 years ago, 75% of what he was 2 years ago, that's still a valuable asset for the 49ers. So I love the fact that he's a Niner. I have everything before this season, basically, in my mind, is long gone history. Jim Harbaugh, who's that? Michael Crabtree, I don't know, but he's got a chain that can't stay on his neck, right? Like, the only person from that era that I'm like super tied to, I think at this point, is Frank Gore. But at this point, I mean, that's distant history, man. Like, it really is distant history in football years. So for me, I love the fact that he's on the team. Bring it on. I think it's great. Have nothing but respect for the dude, and I'm glad that now he's my problem, and I don't have to worry about being on the other side of his trash talking because he's going to be picking people off.
But there were 49ers fans that really, I think, had to struggle with that a little bit.
Oh, yeah, dude. Oh, it was awful for a lot of fans, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to handle themselves. And this is why I think, if you're a fan, like be better than tweeting at players and telling and like talking really and saying terrible things at players that are doing their job and like that. Just don't be that guy. Don't be that person. Don't be that gal. Because you never know when that person's going to be on your team, and you're going to have to ask them to unblock you. Is really what it is.
So with everything coming up this season, Oscar, there's a lot of hype with the Niners. I mean, it feels like the media this year is taking a lot of glee in tearing down the Seahawks and a lot of joy in building up the Rams and the Niners. What is your take on where the Seahawks finish this year and where the Niners finish this year? How do you feel on records there? Do you think these teams are pretty close? Do you think there's still a gap? How do you feel about that?
Man, I think the quarterback is such an important part of an NFL team that I could easily see the Seahawks eking out a division win just on the strength of Russell Wilson alone. And now, I mean, you're free of the Tom Cable curse. So you're going to have an offensive line that is, worth a damn. Even if you have the same players, you're not going to have Tom Cable in there basically making them turnstiles. So I could see, and you've upgraded some players on the offensive line.
You just have to worry now if some of his negativity is going to just emanate from the Bay Area. And kind of, you don't want that coming down from Oakland and infecting you.
Oh, man, I know that the Bay that separates Oakland and San Francisco is basically like the wall in Game of Thrones. There's not much getting through there except for like a fire-breathing dragon. And I don't see a fire-breathing dragon anywhere in the near future. So I think we'll be okay. But I personally, if I had to guess right now, I would think that the Rams still finish first in the division. And I think that the Seahawks and the Niners are going to be in a pretty classic battle for the wild card spot as the second representative of the NFC West in the NFC. I don't know who is going to end up winning that battle. I could easily see the Seahawks winning that battle. I could also see the Niners kind of getting an extra win or two they didn't expect and winning that playoff spot over the Seahawks. So I do think it'll be back to the days where the Niners and Seahawks games matter for playoff positioning, because I think that we're probably going to be locked in that 8, 9, 10 win area between the two teams, and I think it's going to be pretty exciting in the NFC West.
I tend to agree with you, but the only difference is that I think that we're going to be battling it out for the division title while the Rams flounder and implode from all the knuckleheads that they brought in.
I think what's interesting is Jared Goff, right? Jared Goff is definitely helped out by Sean McVay. And this is, I think when we think about the whole question that we asked earlier about elite quarterbacking and Jimmy Garoppolo, is Jared Goff, the quarterback we saw last season, or is he the quarterback we saw under Jeff Fisher? I think that you can isolate quarterback performance outside of a scheme. And Jared Goff, even in a crappy scheme, was not making great throws. The throws that he's making under McVay are definitely aided by scheme. Does that mean that Goff is a bad quarterback? No. It means that he has the opportunity to be good and flourish within a scheme, but he's not in Aaron Rodgers territory. He had one of the worst rookie quarterback seasons in almost the history of football, basically. I mean, outside of your obvious duds, but for a first round and for a first overall pick, the dude didn't play well. So I think a lot of the Rams really hinge on Jared Goff, and if he can produce another year and continue to grow into that role, then yeah, I think you've got an interesting, 3 quarterback race in the NFC West. But if he regresses to the mean at all, then it could be the Niners and the Seahawks battling for supremacy in the NFC West all over again.
Well, and you look back to last season too, I don't think there was a team that was more healthy than the Rams through the entire year last year. And if you have Jared Goff and Andrew Whitworth goes down or Todd Gurley misses any kind of significant time, he's really going to struggle.
Yeah, if Todd Gurley goes down at all, that's the engine of that offense. People think that it's Jared Goff, and obviously he's the quarterback. He has a lot to do, but really, it really is Todd Gurley. If you remove Todd Gurley, you remove a receiving threat that's kind of important. You remove the threat of running the ball. All of a sudden, you don't have to worry about defending against the run. You can really make sure that you defend against the pass, and Jared Goff has got to make those tight window throws that define great quarterbacking. And if you're not a great quarterback and you can't make those tight window throws, then guess what? All of a sudden, the scheme can't help you. The scheme can't protect you. And that's the difference, I think, between the Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady's of the world and the Russell Wilsons of the world as well, from the Jared Goffs or, maybe even the burgeoning Jimmy Garoppolos, is that even when windows are tight, Tom Brady's still going to make that throw, and he's still going to let his receiver get the ball. And Aaron Rodgers is going to do the same. And Jared Goff, not sure if he'll do it, Jimmy Garoppolo has been able to do it, up and down depending on how far away the target is. And so, I think that's the difference between elite quarterbacks and quarterbacks that want to be elite or flash eliteness.
So it sounds like the one thing we all agree on is there's nobody that can play the quarterback position in Arizona right now. Like they don't matter. Like we can all agree Arizona doesn't matter this year.
Didn't they get relegated? Like, isn't that a thing now? We're just going to kick them down to college football. That's what you were doing. Like, everyone's obsessed with the World Cup right now. So we're going to take soccer league rules, right? We're going to just relegate them and say you play USC and whomever wins will decide who's going to come up and play in the NFL.
Right. And that's a 50-50 shot at this point, I think.
Yeah. Who knows? Dude, I think the Cardinals are, if we're kind of in that mid-range 8, 9, 10 win year, they are definitely retooling and they'll be lucky to get to 6 wins.
All right. Well, as we close this out, Oscar, I want to go through some of the position groups for between the Seahawks and the 49ers to kind of get an idea of where talent lies. And I think, there's some groups that we can kind of just scratch off right away. Like I know the 49ers defensive line is more talented than the Seahawks defensive line. I look at guys like Solomon Thomas and DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead, and I go, yeah, that's probably better what the Seahawks have. And right. Linebackers, you can say, yeah, KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner. Now, Reuben Foster, Eli Harold, young guys coming up. Yeah, they could be good, but probably not on the same level. And then quarterbacks, we've kind of talked about that already. So.
And you're not even going to give your boy Malcolm Smith any love? You're going to throw Eli Harold in there?
Malcolm Smith, he was our Super Bowl MVP, although maybe not the real one. I think our real one just announced his retirement with Cam Chancellor. But, there are some groups that I look at and I go, well, offensive line, I think it's, maybe that's one it's kind of a push. I know you have a right tackle with McGlinchey. Originally, I think we were thinking that Gilliam was going to end up getting the start there at right tackle, but it makes sense that you put your rookie in the lineup there. Joe Staley, you got Dwayne Brown for the Seahawks. Where do you, for the offensive line, let's start there.
All right, so for the offensive line, I'm actually going to go with the Niners as having a better position group, and that doesn't mean that they have a good position group. It just means that you've drafted a lot of defensive linemen to play offensive line is all I'm saying.
We're done with that, though. Although it sounds like J.R. Sweezy's coming back for a tryout, so maybe I can't say that.
Yeah, good luck with that. So I think Dwayne Brown is definitely your best left tackle that you've had.
But Weston Richburg versus Justin Britt, I mean, they're kind of... upper end toward the center. They're not top centers.
I think even I would still give Richburg the slight nod there. But even if we call that a push, I think Joe Staley is a better left tackle than Dwayne Brown is right now. At both of the stages at which their career is at right now, I think you give that to Staley easily. Staley was a top 3 graded PFF guard, and Brown's grade was 77.9, so he was in that kind of average area. Again, really good left tackle for the Seahawks. But this is where player context in the NFL at large become important. And just because he's the best left tackle you've had in a while doesn't mean he's good when you compare him to other left tackles across the league. Then you've got Posick. I don't know if he's Polish or not. So
he's up and comer.
Yeah, he's, again, up and comer, not proven, hasn't played very well. You've got Britt, which is a push. Fluker, which, again, hasn't done much in his entire career. Effetti, young dude who has played okay, bit of a hothead, still has something to prove. You compare that to, even if we call Effetti and McGlinchey a push, you've got Laken Tomlinson, who hasn't played great, but has played above average, especially in the games that Jimmy started. You've got Richburg, which is a push. You've got Cooper, which is a first-round talent who played, again, average. And you've got, an average interior of the line with some pretty good bookends compared to questions on the Seahawks except for Brown. And I think it's a slight edge Niners, but I'm not going to, go ahead and say that the Niners offensive line's amazing, right? That's one of the problem areas. But I still think it's a slight edge Niners.
I think slight edge Niners is fair. Now, wide receivers. I can't argue with that. Wide receivers, though, this one's interesting because Pierre Garçon comes in from Washington. Yeah. You got Marquise Goodwin.
So Doug Baldwin's so good, man.
Baldwin's so good, though.
He is really good. And I mean, I love the Marquise Goodwin story. I love that he, has kind of emerged as a wide receiver that is more than just a deep threat. And I think Pierre Garçon is really, really good. I think the top of the Seahawks wide receiver roster is better than the Niners. I think Baldwin is a better receiver than the Niners have on the roster. But I think top to bottom, the Niners might be a push in my mind because you've got Ricardo Lockett, And then you've got like
Tyler Lockett, yeah.
Tyler Lockett, sorry.
Yeah, Jerome Brown from the...
And then Jerome Brown, and then like, Brandon Marshall, we'll see what the hell he's got. But that's really about it. I mean, I'm looking at names like Caleb Scott and Marcus Johnson, Keenan Reynolds.
I don't even recognize those names. Who are those? The Seahawks roster guys?
Yeah, they're basically like camp bodies at this point. And so you think what you guys carry, 5 wide receivers? So it'll be Baldwin, Lockett, Brown, Marshall, and then whatever young guy decides to make it. Yeah, I would take Trent Taylor, who had one of the highest pass ratings on slant routes this year from the slot. You look at Marquise Goodwin and you think of Pierre Garçon. As a unit, I think they are probably slight edge over the Seahawks, even if Doug Baldwin is, of both classes combined, the best wide receiver, hands down.
Okay, well, I'm not conceding the receivers. I would on the line, but where the one place where I would concede to you, because there are so many unknowns, and I think it would be running back, because with McKinnon coming in and Kyle Juszczyk, I think that's a pretty good tandem. So I'll give you that one. If we go over to the defensive side, then I think where the argument's going to come is the secondary, because again, like the receiver position, where Doug Baldwin, yes, is the top among the receivers, you can also say Earl Thomas, and I know you gave us garbage about whether or not he's even going to be on the team. Earl Thomas will be on the team this year, and he is the best player out of all the secondary players on the two teams, and that's even if Richard Sherman comes back to top form for you guys. But whether or not the pieces around them and how that's going to work, how do you look at that between the 49ers and Seahawks?
I think you have to give the edge to the Seahawks here, just because they've got players that have proven they can do it. And I do think Earl Thomas is easily the best defensive back if you combine those two rosters right now. He's amazing. I think you look at Byron Maxwell, someone who has proven he can perform in the system. Justin Coleman, also someone who has proven he can do it. I think Justin Coleman and Ahkello Witherspoon actually are not too far off in terms of talent. I think the wild card here really is what happens with Richard Sherman. Yeah. If Richard Sherman can get back to above average form or just sub elite form, all of a sudden you're talking about two secondaries that are pretty good. And I think Adrian Colbert, who is the second year safety for the Niners, he was a 7th round pick out of Miami, a complete revelation, to the point where he's pushed a former 1st round pick in Jimmy Ward basically to the bench. He's been that good. And so I think that you've got a team with pieces in the 49ers that are a bit more unproven than Seattle, which is why I think Seattle takes the edge. But it's closer than I would have thought. And if things break well for the 49ers, they could have, I think, a unit that's just as good, if not just a little better, than the Seahawks. But right now, you have to give the edge to the Seahawks.
And long snapper, clearly, Tyler Ott would crush Kyle Nelson. I mean, we don't even need to talk about that.
Yeah, dude, geez.
No, I do think that the area that where y'all have a clear advantage is linebackers. I mean, Bobby Wagner, I think at this point is the best linebacker in the NFL right now. The dude's absurd. He is literally everything you want in a linebacker. And KJ Wright's not too far behind. The dude's great, and they're both fantastic coverage defenders as well.
Thank you, because everybody on the East Coast still crushes all over Luke Kuechly like he's still the greatest linebacker in the world. Yeah, he's really good.
He's good, but Bobby Wagner, I think, is a better linebacker than Luke Kuechly. And that's nothing bad against Luke Kuechly. I think that's just how good Bobby Wagner is. Bobby Wagner, in my mind, there was, I think, on Twitter going around a couple weeks ago, like, what player would you take from the opposing team to your team to kind of put you over the top? It's Bobby Wagner, hands down. Could you imagine Bobby Wagner and Reuben Foster as starting linebackers for one NFL defense?
That'd be pretty burly.
It's stupid. It's absolutely stupid. And they would never come off the field. I mean, Bobby Wagner's coverage grade was like 93.5. And that's absurd. It's absurd. He's an eraser when it comes to tight ends. The absolute eraser. It's great. And KJ Wright's not too far behind. So I think that's probably the strongest position group on your roster outside of Russell Hustle Bustle at quarterback.
Well, for a guy who watched Patrick Willis for so many years, I will take that as a compliment, and especially because, Bobby Wagner's great. Now, this is interesting, Adam. He brought up the one guy that he would take from the Seahawks. Who's the guy that you take from the 49ers to put onto the Seahawks?
Right now, just for fit purposes as well, I would say either Tart.
Interesting.
Or one of the linemen.
DeForest Buckner Solomon Thomas, one of those guys would have to be it, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I feel fine about our defensive line. I mean, we may not have Sheldon Richardson, but if you look at the depth overall with, Nas Jones, Jared Reed, the two dudes that we brought in from Minnesota, all very serviceable players. I think you got enough there to compete. With Cam's absence, like I could take an upgrade at strong safety because I think Tart's better than McDougald.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good call. I wouldn't have thought of Tart right away. I probably would have gone to, if I'm giving you someone I think is going to upgrade you, my immediate thought was Joe Staley, just because then that gives you actual bookend tackles that's going to protect your quarterback. And if you give Russell Wilson time, you're dead. It doesn't matter what your wide receivers are doing. The scramble drills that y'all can run, if you give him any time whatsoever, he's going to pick you apart. I mean, he's just that good.
Yeah, but we have to think about what Pete Carroll would do, and he wouldn't pick anybody on the offensive side of the football. He would go defense immediately.
Yeah, and that's why I think Tart's actually a really good pick, because he is the new Cam Chancellor, and I think he could fill that role exceptionally well. My curiosity for y'all is, why haven't y'all signed Eric Reed?
I've kind of been wondering about that too.
Is basically, he's Tart light. He's not bad. He's not great, but he's not bad. And he would come super cheap. And he's, a high athletic, talented locker room guy player. Never been an issue in the locker room. It's just he managed to take a knee, with Kaepernick every now and again. And so now he's not getting a job. But Pete Carroll's always been the guy who's been like Big Tent, right? Like, he doesn't care. You do you. This is a guy who signed Terrell Owens, right?
Yeah. Well, true. I think this offseason, you saw the exodus of hoopla. Like, I think they were just tired of it. And so getting rid of Bennett and getting rid of Sherman and those guys, I think it was a little bit of like, hey, man, not because we don't support what you're doing or anything like that. It's just we just don't need the extra distraction right now. Like, we're not good enough to overcome that. And I think maybe that's what they're thinking, because I feel like they probably have in their mind the same quality of player in McDougald without the hoopla that comes with it.
I can see that. That's fair. Now, one thing I will you conceded the halfbacks right away. I don't know, man. Rashad Penny, I think that guy's going to be pretty damn good.
It's more of just an unknown, I think, for us, because we don't know how they're going to perform at the NFL level.
I totally get that. I really do. I mean, it's the same argument I use for the defensive backs, so it makes sense. But I do think that, come week 10, 11, I think Rashad Penny is going to be your lead back. And I think it's not going to be a question. I think he's really, really good. And I think he's going to take away snaps from J.D. McKissick fairly quickly. And I think he's one of the more exciting picks that you've had in a long time. And I think that he's probably the best back on the roster right away.
Now, I was happy that just knowing that the Seahawks got their number 2 running back by, picking running back before any other team. But did you have Penny as the second best running back coming out of college?
I would never pick a running back full stop until the 3rd round. So I don't think where you picked him made a lot of sense. But I do think he is a fantastic running back, and probably, depending on the style of offense that you run, in the top 3 in terms of actual backs in the draft. So I could absolutely see the case for him being the second back off the board. I just don't see it before the 3rd round. I don't think that you need to take backs that early because of the value of what they offer, unless they're ridiculous pass catching backs. Mm-hmm. But then just wait until you get Alvin Kamara in the 3rd round, because that's where you get Alvin Kamara. And he's more efficient and more effective at running backing, because that's where the NFL is going. They're going towards a league where what you can do in the pass game is way more important than what you can do in the run game. And so that's where I think things are going. And so just pick the receiving back in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. In the 1st or 2nd round, pick things that are way more rare and way more important, like edge rusher, quarterback, or tackle.
See, Oscar and I were on the same page when it came to the Penny pick, because I was not thrilled with it for everything that he just said.
Hey, I understand. We had an opportunity. The Seahawks had an opportunity to get Harold Landry, who Oscar was talking up, as a potential top 10 pick, as a guy that they would have liked for the 49ers. And shoot, they almost got him to fall to him in the early 2nd round, just taking 3 picks ahead of Dante Pettis at 44. So I understand the mentality. It's just, I think with the needs of the team, and just when you looked at last year and you said, we have to be better at this position, it didn't shock me for the Seahawks to go there with the very first pick.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where their head was at, but again, I'm just not sure that he's the back that fits the system that Pete Carroll's been looking for. But I mean, we've been over that ad nauseum. But I really hope I'm wrong, and I hope Oscar's right in the sense that by towards the end of the season that he's our lead back and he's killing it. I really hope to be dead ass wrong on that.
Well, Oscar, really want to thank you for joining us once again, another year down. And this is going to be, we've gone in cycles now where we've really had two teams that were rivals against one another, facing off in NFC championships and that sort of thing. And now I think it's coming back around for these two teams. And well, hopefully, it's not we're not on the way down like everybody in the media would have you believe, but that we're relatively, we're going to have some competitive games now. So this year could be fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. And I think you're exactly right. There will be a ton of competitive games. Rivalries are fun when teams are relevant. And I think that this is going to be the year where both the Seahawks and the Niners are once again relevant late into the season.
For any of our Seahawks fans that want to check you out, because you guys have a cool thing going. Tell us about your scheme month, what you got going on now, and where people can find you to listen to your show, catch you on Twitter.
Yeah, so we actually kind of rebranded Scheme Month this year to Smart Football Month because we realized that scheme is really difficult to track via podcast. And while we did post some videos and some things on kind of Niners Nation, it was difficult to just stick to scheme. So we're taking it a bit broader and we're talking about just things that make you a smarter football watcher in general. And, both David, my co-host, and I were inspired by Chris Brown of Smart Football. And so we decided to give a nod to Chris Brown and call it Smart Football Month. And you can catch those episodes on Niners Nation. You can always follow me at Better Rivals, BETTER Rivals. And of course, when we play the Seahawks, we'll cover the Seahawks and the Niners in depth as well. So even if you only tune in for those episodes, definitely make sure you catch them.
Tuning into the last one, I would say, even if you're, diehard Seahawks fan, but you're into the schemes and the X's and O's part of the game, that you can really get a lot out of what you guys do there, particularly this month when you're looking at the smart football stuff. So I would recommend any of our listeners to check it out. And you know what, Oscar, we missed what nickname did you guys come up with for Jimmy G?
Oh yeah, it was Jimmy GQ. Jimmy GQ. If we had a whole tournament for names, some of them were great, like Jimmy GQ, Jimmy Jesus, also a favorite. Others were terrible. Like apparently Jimmy Garop was a fan favorite because, or Jimmy Guap because there's rap songs and there are things. The kids, the Snapchats and the kids and the Instagrams. I don't know. But yeah, ultimately after a bare knuckle brawl of a tournament, we ended up with Jimmy GQ as the unquestioned champion of the Jimmy Garoppolo nickname tournament.
All right. Well, there it is. Good to know. Oscar, thanks again for coming on. And I'm sure we'll talk to you during the season. Really appreciate you coming back on for our Know Your Rival series. And we'll talk it's not going to be till December. They put both of our games just 2 weeks apart, but I'm sure we'll be looking for you then.
That's because they know we matter.
Yeah.
And so we'll see you around Christmas.
And go Hawks.
And as always, go Niners.
Once again, another great interview from Oscar of the Better Rivals.
Oh, he's fantastic. I feel like we found really great people to consistently come on for both the Rams and the 49ers. And I look forward to speaking with Oscar every year. Just a really analytical guy when it comes to football and really knows his stuff. And it's always an interesting conversation for sure.
Well, maybe we should touch on Richard Sherman here real quick because we didn't get to a couple of the things in our interview with Oscar. Richard Sherman was back in the news here these last couple of weeks. Probably.
Are we really going to talk about this? Because this is also dumb.
Yeah, well, essentially, he's just
doing Richard Sherman things.
He's doing Richard Sherman things and saying Richard Sherman things that he said when he left the team. It's just now it's in an SI article. And it's bringing this all back up again. And he's not really saying anything new. He's not really saying anything Seahawks fans shouldn't expect.
The Seahawks have lost their way. They've lost their way. They don't know where they are.
Yeah.
They don't even know they're in Seattle anymore. They've lost their way.
I think he's speaking to the point that they've made some mistakes over the last couple of years. The interesting thing is when he gets into the quote after he says they've lost their way. He says, when we were rolling, it was an environment for pure competitors. When it becomes something else, then it's more difficult to thrive in. And I think that's what was tough on Earl. That's what was tough on a lot of guys. But I think as it kind of progressed, you started seeing the writing on the wall. You're like, not only are they probably moving in a different direction, but it's like, oh, well, I kind of want to move in a different direction too. So it happens like that. All great things must come to an end, I guess. This idea that it was an environment for pure competitors, like he says, I don't know what he's referencing unless you remember when Kason Williams got cut from the team and Sherman was somehow, I think he pointed to that as it was a sign of competition not winning out over a guy like Amara Darboh, who didn't really even do anything in the preseason. But if Richard Sherman's getting hung up on the competitive aspect of a fifth string wide receiver, I think Richard Sherman's kind of lost his way.
Well, I think that's the more interesting way to look at it. This is really this is honestly a non-story to me on every level, because number one, what the hell do you expect him to say at this point? Number two, he's Richard Sherman still, right? Like, he's the same guy.
He still will be.
Who runs his mouth a little bit? Are you who on this planet is stunned that he would have something that's, it's not even all that negative. It's not like he's like, oh, Pete's the worst and blah, 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 blah. He's like, I think they lost their way a little bit and made a couple mistakes. Like, it's not even like he said something all that harsh.
Right.
And then on top of all of that, if you want to look at why the dynamic changed as a team from being a very always compete kind of mindset, you had a bunch of guys like Sherman, Cam, Russell, all these guys who were late round picks, or, Doug Baldwin, undrafted, all these guys who were late round picks who were just struggling to make the NFL. And so it was all about football. It was all about football. And then once they succeeded, they all got paid and they were all starters, entrenched. So that competition kind of goes away. So if you want to talk about the fact that it's no longer a competitive environment, you need only to look at yourself, Mr. Sherman, because you got paid, Earl got paid, Cam got paid, everybody got paid, and it changed the dynamic. That's how it works. And there's no way around it. It's not a bad thing. It's not, that's the way, it's like the circle of football, the circle of life. It's how it works. So I really don't understand, A, what his gripe is, B, why the media freaked out over this statement, and C, why I just had to talk about it at all.
I would not be surprised if this is the last thing that we hear from Richard Sherman. I think as a rival now, the Seahawks, we should expect to hear from him regularly. Like you said, he's the same guy.
Yes.
And that's what made us love him as Seahawks fans. So we shouldn't expect him to change and not direct any of his competitiveness everywhere else except Seattle.
Go ahead. Bring the trash talk. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just talk.
And then when we smoke them twice this year, then
correct,
we'll get the last laugh.
Yeah, when Baldwin's leaving him in his dust and catching 10 catches for 135 yards and 2 TDs en route to a route. That's hard to say. Yes, en route to a route. Yes, we will. It'll be fun. We'll see what he has to say then.
All right, Adam, what do you say we close this show out this week a little bit early, get into some Better at Life, and make this a proper show? And then we'll be back later this week. I have a Prisco's World segment coming up in our next show, and we'll get back to thanking our members of the flock. We got some new members. We'll get to them. Yeah, what do you say? Get into some Better at Life.
Well, my Better at Life this week is for Bellhop's CEO, Luke Marklin. And they are a moving company based in Alabama. I came across this story and I thought it was super cool. And then it's not just for him though, because there's another person who's a star of this little article. His name is Walter Carr. He's an employee for Bellhop's. And when I saw this article, I thought this was one of the cooler things I'd seen in a long time. So Walter Carr is a young college student. Just got a job with Bellhop's. It was his first day, and he hopped in his 03 Nissan Altima. Wouldn't start. He lives that night before his first day. Wouldn't start. So he lives 20 miles away from the office. Instead of missing his first day of work because of a car that does not work, he got up at 4 a.m. and he started walking 20 miles to work. He got the majority of the way there. Police picked him up along the way, took him to breakfast. He got to go and get to work. And the CEO, Luke Marklin, heard about this kid. And he was like, that is amazing that this guy would, go out of his way. That's the kind of work ethic that we're looking for. That's an amazing kid. And so he drove down from Tennessee with his 2014 Ford Escape, and he walked up to Walter and he handed him the keys.
Wow.
Yeah. And I thought that was pretty cool. Just a bunch of guys doing the right thing all the way around. Luke Marklin, Walter Carr, better at life than Skip Bayless.
Better at life indeed. My better at life this week is for former Tacoma native Tony Miles. And if you're a World Series of Poker fan, you probably saw Tony Miles sporting a Russell Wilson jersey throughout the part of the competition of the World Series of Poker. Now, part of the problem I have with this is he showed up to the final round wearing a Tim Tebow jersey, but he's also lived in Florida, so he must be a Florida fan of some sort. And I thought about giving him a do better for not rocking the Russell Wilson in the finals, because if you make it to the finals of the World Series of Poker, don't you just kind of wear what got you there? Like, you don't change up your items of clothing.
I don't know. I don't really know what the proper etiquette is with poker. That is something I certainly will never watch on TV.
I just think toward football fandom, if your team's rolling, and winning throughout the season, you don't want to change your jersey. You don't want to wash your jersey. You want to keep doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe that's different with poker.
What happened was he screwed with his Hakara, and you see what happened.
But he took second place. And it's not just the fact that
wait, you know what he took? What was it, first place?
He took second place.
No, but it wasn't first place, right?
Right.
Oh, then he took last. Because if you ain't first, you're last.
I have trouble calling a guy who just won $5 million a loser.
I just said he tied for last place with all the other guys / losers.
Because if you're not first, you're last.
That's right.
I don't think that works in this situation, because not only did he win $5 million in poker, reading a little bit about Tony Miles' story, just 2 years ago, he said he was at a point at rock bottom in his life. He was detoxing at his mom's house in Florida. He was addicted to alcohol and opiates. And now, in just 2 years, he's turned things around to the point where he's a millionaire. I mean, think about how crazy that is.
Well, let me tell you how crazy that is. If my friend or family member who is detoxing and trying to get himself clean looks at me and says, okay, I'm at my low point, but my life plan is to make a comeback playing poker, I might say, you might want to think of something else.
Well, clearly he has a talent for it. And I know these people who go especially deep in World Series of Poker and are professional poker players. There's a method to it. There's a lot of math that goes into it. You have to do a lot of computations in your head to be really good at poker.
And then you got to get lucky.
And you have to be a little bit lucky.
Yeah.
And he got lucky wearing a Russell Wilson jersey, which rode him into the final match and allowed him to take second place. $5 million winner, Tony Miles. Better at life than Skip Bayless.
Perfect.
All right, Adam. Hopefully this records this week. Hopefully the digital gremlins that are apparently 49ers fans don't come and steal this show too.
Right. Exactly. I think that's what happened.
I know that's what happened. I don't think there's any other explanation.
Clearly.
And with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.